Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 126. This is the seventh and inshallah final installment of the Battle of the Ditch, or the Battle of the Coalition, the Allied Forces, the Confederates, so also known as the Khandaq and Ahzab. As I say, inshallah, it's our seventh and final lesson on this battle, where we sort of rounding it to a close, because we did the end of the battle essentially last time, and we're just going to draw on some of the things to learn from the battle and some of the lessons essentially, and what we can take away from it and what we can apply today. And so very briefly, I mean, I will do a recap, but last week we did where the weather turns foul, and then the covert operations between Banu Qurayzah and the Quraysh, and then Haudhaifa bin Iman was sent to spy on the Quraysh. The windstorms and everything meant that the Quraysh packed up and left because they couldn't trust Ghatafaan, and they couldn't trust Banu Qurayzah to keep their side of the battle plan, and so they fled, and Haudhaifa then returned with the good news to the Prophet ﷺ. Excuse me. Before we go into the lessons, let's sort of just step back and look at the battle overall. I mean, I know we'll do some of the selected verses from Surah Al-Ahzab later on, but just in terms of a quick recap, putting it all into context, and because there isn't that much fighting in it, it takes on a different hue when we study the Seerah and this Ghazwa in particular. So then we had the Battle of Badr, we had the Battle of Uhud. After that, there were 7 or 8 battles, and then a relative period of calm for nearly a year, where the Prophet ﷺ was able to consolidate his strength and his power and the Islamic State in Medina, and it started to exert power and influence. And then the Jewish tribes that were expelled from Medina, Banu Qaynuqa, but more recently Banu Nadir, they were hoping that something would change in the meantime, but they were seeing this stalemate, and in fact the process of just consolidating and growing. So they took it upon themselves to hatch a plan, some treachery, some intrigues and conspiracies to try to wrestle back control. So they felt completely humiliated. They were exiled to Khaybar, and so they started this stage of conspiracy. And again, they were enemies to the Prophet ﷺ and to the Muslims, but they weren't in a position, or they weren't able to directly maneuver against the Prophet ﷺ. Some would say they were too cowardly to do it, so they acted through other people who were only too willing and eager to fight the fight on their behalf. So the 20 or so chiefs and influential figures from Banu Nadir, the previously exiled tribe, they went to Makkah, obviously the main enemy to the Prophet ﷺ, and they formed an unholy alliance with the Quraysh. So they began to goad the people of Makkah against the Prophet ﷺ, and they said, look, we're going to give you full support, full backing, we'll finance you, we'll get the other tribes to come and join this confederacy. And so this was music to the ears of the Quraysh, because they wanted to redeem their honour, their blemished reputation, and they wanted to once and for all deal with the challenge of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Muslims and Islam. So the Jewish elders of Banu Nadir were successful in their endeavour to incite the Arabs against the other Arabs, the Arabs of Quraysh against the messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order for them to exact their revenge from being expelled from Medina. So then, amongst this group, again, we talked before about Huyay bin Akhtab, Salam bin Abi al-Huqayq, and Kinana bin ibn Abi al-Huqayq, and then from Bani Wa'il there were Huwaytha bin Qais and Abu Amr and lots of other people in this delegation. And then the interplay was really interesting between the Quraysh and the chiefs of Banu Nadir, the Jewish elders, and they were basically saying, look, you guys, who's right? You guys are people of the book, the scripture, people of scripture. Are we right, or are Muhammad and his followers right? And the Jewish elders said that the Quraysh, although being idol worshippers, were on the right path. And so the Quraysh were given assurances by Huyay saying, look, basically, Banu Qurayzah, they've remained inside Medina. They're there to deceive Muhammad, and they're waiting for us to come and raid Medina, and they will help us from within. So with all of this, the Quraysh threw their weight behind this plot, gathered lots of troops, and very joyously, left and marched very quickly to when the time was right to meet them. Same delegation, they went to Ghatafaan, said the same sort of things. The Jewish delegation there, managed to sort of bribe them with the produce of Khaybar, and so they joined in this in the allied coalition. So you had the Quraysh, you had Banu Kinana, you had other people from Tihama under the leadership of Abu Sufyan, and then you had Banu Salim, you had Ghatafaan, Bani Murrah, and they were all sort of coalescing around the Ghatafaan, and these two big groups of armies, 10,000 in total, marched upon Medina as quick as they could at an agreed point in time. So there are 10,000 of them, and this 10,000 outnumbers the whole population of Medina, men, women and children. So, these fighters, they came with the intent of essentially flattening Medina with the help of Banu Qurayzah inside. The Prophet ﷺ, he was on a high state of alert. His intelligence agency managed to find out that this was happening. The spies from within the enemy ranks reported to the Prophet ﷺ, and then certainly when the marching had commenced, it was obvious when the plan of attack was. So the Prophet ﷺ gathered the Muslims. They had a shura. What should we do? And this was a completely new situation. I mean, 10,000, coming to fight them. How can they possibly defend the city against that? And obviously they were made aware that their express intention was to completely annihilate, exterminate the Muslims. So as part of this situation, Salman al-Farsi, he said, look, why don't you dig some trenches, which is what we used to do in Persia, some defensive trenches, and this was the best idea that came up. So the Prophet ﷺ agreed, and in groups of Muslims, they were given different sections to dig around the clock. This is the dead of winter. They were all hungry. They were starving. It was cold. And as I say, they were 24/7 digging this trench. We've also talked about some of the miracles that happened during this time. Not only were they hungry, Allah provided the rizq, and there, a few miracles are well recorded. The one of Jabir, seeing the Prophet tying some stones to his stomach to prevent him getting the hunger pangs. So he goes back to his wife, says, whatever food you have, let's make a meal. When the Prophet says, why don't you come with a couple of others? I've got some food. And the Prophet invited everybody to Jabir's house, did dua, and they were all fed, and there was still food left over. Same, a lady brought a handful of dates, gave the Prophet ﷺ, threw it over his cloak, and basically the dates started multiplying by the permission of Allah, and everybody, ate of those dates. Then whilst they're digging, they come across a big rock that they can't move, they can't cut, they can't do anything with. The Prophet ﷺ comes, gets a pickaxe or a spade, whacks the rock, sparks fly everywhere, and he goes Bismillah, whacks the rock, and then he goes, the keys of Asham, Syria, they are mine, I swear by Allah, I can see the palaces. At the moment, second time he strikes it, another big chunk flies off, Allahu Akbar, Persia is mine, I can see the white palaces of Madian. And then he strikes it for the third time, and the whole boulder, obliterates. And he goes, Allah is great, I've been given the keys of Yemen, and I can see the gates of Sana whilst I'm in my place. So the Prophet he's prophesying victory for the believers. He's encouraging them, getting their morale up whilst they're in a really difficult situation. It's key that he keeps them focused, and he promises them victory. Overall victory is there for the Muslims. And despite the fact that the Muslims are promised victory, that promise in itself doesn't deter them from struggling to achieve the victory. Now that's really important. Okay, rather it spurred them on even harder to get that victory. They didn't sit back and just relax saying, "Oh, we promised victory. Let's just chill. Allah will sort it out for us." No, they promised victory, so they strive even harder to achieve it. So it's not enough for us just nowadays just to wait for victory. We've got to strive to the utmost to achieve that victory. And we'll talk about how Allah will reward you if you put your trust in Him. And again, so then the attack happened. They camped outside. They're frustrated, the Quraysh and the allied forces, the Ahzab. What do we do? Never come across this before. The people inside Medina, when they saw in reality the 10,000 people camped outside, so some people started freaking out. But the Muslims, they will turn, the sincere Muslims, they will turn around and say, look, this is what Allah and His Messenger had promised us. Allah and His Messenger spoke the truth, and this only added to their faith and to their submissiveness to Allah. Allah mentions this in the Qur'an, that this reality of this big challenge, for the strong believers, it enhances their belief. For the weak believers, it pushes them away. And the hypocrites, it pushes them away. And again, that's a really important lesson. The victory, the promise of victory is really important. We should establish that in our minds, and we should turn to Allah and not be disheartened by the tribulations that we face. So the Muslims then, they're camped, they're patrolling the trench, but they're camped near Mount Silla, where they've got a good view of all the area of the enemy, and obviously they're laid under siege. They haven't got enough provisions to last them too long inside the city, and likewise outside the city. They may have access to supply lines, but they didn't plan on a siege. They planned on a quick battle in and out. So there's nervousness amongst the Quraysh. There's frustration that things aren't moving fast. So a small group of elite fighters, they managed to cross the trench. Here you've got Amr ibn Abdul Wud, you've got Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, and Dirar ibn al-Khattab. They make their way across the trench, and Amr ibn Abdul Wud, he challenges the Muslims, for a duel in this marshy area between the trench and Mount Silla, where the Muslims are. Ali ibn Abi Talib stands up, and the Prophet says, look, it's Amr. But on the third time, the Prophet then sends Ali, and then Ali gets to Amr, and he goes, who are you? Look, son of my brother, I don't want to kill you. But then Ali replied, but I want to kill you. They fight, and obviously Ali manages to kill him. Panic amongst the Quraysh. Ikrimah and Dirar, they also start fighting, but no one dies, and they go back. Days pass, things get even more tense. The Quraysh get even more frustrated. There's deadlock and stalemate. So then they start to go up a gear. So they they start showering arrows, volleys of arrows against the Muslims. So much so that this really tense time where the Muslims are under constant attack. They've got volleys of arrows coming in them and spears and whatnot. And so the Muslims feel as if, well, this is the prelude to a full frontal assault. So they're in a really tense situation. In that tension, the Prophet ﷺ and many Muslims failed to observe their Asr prayer. The sun sets, as it's setting now, and it becomes Maghrib. Prophet ﷺ, he's really frustrated. Umar comes up to him, I missed my prayer. Prophet ﷺ realizes he's missed his prayer, and then he makes a dua, let Allah fill their houses and their graves with fire as they've prevented us from offering the Asr prayer. And then again, this carries on for some time, and other narrations say that because of this situation, the Prophet ﷺ, he combined some of his prayers, the evening and the night prayers, and that's narrated by Ahmad bin Shafi. But there's no real armies facing off each other, and in total only a small number of people die, maybe about 5 or 6 Muslims, and maybe 10 or so of the mushrikeen, and only as we said, 1 or 2 of those were killed by the sword. During that, the obviously from the Muslim point of view, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he was shot by a stray arrow, through his clavicle, pierced his artery, and essentially proved to be a fatal wound. I mean, it took him a couple of weeks, or maybe nearly a month, to finally expire. But he knew the end was there. And we talked about him making a dua. Oh Allah, you know that nothing is closer to my heart than striving in your way against these disbelievers, these people who belied your messenger and banished him from his town. Oh Allah, I deeply believe that you have decreed that we should fight them. So if there is still more fighting to be done, let me go with them, and let me stay alive in order to do this jihad against them more. But if it is settled, if your decree is there, I beseech you to ignite it again, so that I may breathe my last in this context. But if I am to die, before facing the Quraysh, essentially let me not die until I take full revenge on Banu Qurayzah. And again, we'll talk about that inshallah next week. So again, on to Banu Qurayzah. They again, that was the sucker punch that the Allied forces had. So they, within Medina, they've got promise that they will flip sides and fight alongside the Allied forces, the coalition against the Muslims. And to cement the deal, they sent Huyay bin Akhtab, the chief of Banu Nadir, to the chief of Banu Qurayzah, Qa'b bin Asad, and he manages to convince him. Qa'b was reluctant, but in the end he agreed to tear up the pact with the Prophet ﷺ, and then to launch in stealth some war operations against the Muslims, to sow distrust, and then when the actual day of battle, they would fight from the inside Medina. So as part of these operations, they tried to storm the secluded garrison where the Muslim women and children were housed. And then we talked about the story of Safiya, hearing some of the Jews from Banu Qurayzah trying to climb the wall, trying to wake Hassan bin Thabit, but in the end, going down herself and killing one of them, and then the Jews of Banu Qurayzah, they then felt that these army garrisons, or these garrisons with the women and children, were heavily fortified and protected by Muslim fighters. They didn't realise it was Sophia that defended them. But the Prophet obviously got news of this, that Banu Qurayzah are turning on them. So he dispatched 4 really elite, high-level Muslims, senior delegations: Sa'd bin Mu'adh, Sa'd ibn Ubadah, Abdullah ibn Rawaha, and Khawat ibn Jubair, to go and find out what these rumours are about. But he told them, don't spread panic, and just let me know if this has happened, that they have betrayed us. Let me know in secret. But if these rumours are groundless, let everyone know. Because literally these rumours are spread throughout the camp. So these 4 men, they met with Banu Qurayzah. They had a really hostile encounter with them, and came back saying, these guys are saying that we don't recognise any pact. There was never any alliance between us and Muhammad. So now the Prophet ﷺ has to divide his army and send part of it back to defend the rear of the army and to defend the Muslim women and children. And that, the evening when that news comes, Allah mentions that in the Qur'an, where he says, in translation, and when their eyes grew wild and their hearts reached their throats. I mean, this was the most tense time, because they knew that this is it. They've turned against us. They can fight any time, which means that the battle is imminent. So seeing all this, when the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, again playing their part in the treachery, they turn around and they start taunting the Muslims, and they start openly retreating, and this open hostility, open mutiny within the ranks of the Muslims. They're saying, look, Muhammad used to promise, us with we're going to eat the treasures of the Khosrow and the Caesar, and we don't even feel safe to go to the toilet. And much like many so-called Muslims today, they're going around saying, look, how can you be united? How can you rule the world? How can you, have a khilafah? How can you be so powerful when everyone's, eating off you like this? You're just living in a utopia, a dreamland. You're trying to create an entity of angels. So with that same taunting and counter propaganda, they trying to sow the seeds of defeatism, and they pretend to withdraw openly to their homes, to defend their homes as a ruse not to fight. Again, so that further depletes the army of the Muslims. So not only are the army of the Muslims having to defend their rear, having to defend the women as well, now being unsure about the Banu Qurayzah and the hypocrites, they've got the army in front of them. And at this point in time, the Prophet ﷺ really decided. I mean, it could have been here, or it was a bit earlier, but the Muslims, they strengthened their resolve. The other thing the Prophet ﷺ did in this time, and there's one narration, Ibn Kathir says that there's about 12 days where there wasn't any fighting, or shoot, and the only shooting of a few arrows. The Prophet ﷺ tried politically to disunite the Allied forces. So, he tried to conclude a pact with the chiefs of Ghatafaan, saying, we're going to donate you a third of the crops of Medina. What do you say to that? Ghatafaan, they were tempted by that, because they just came, they're mercenary army, they just came for wealth. But the deal hadn't been agreed. Both parties went away to discuss with their own groups. Prophet, he discussed this with Sa'd bin Mu'adh and Sa'd ibn Ubadah, and they basically said, look, Allah has honoured us with Islam, He's guided us to Him, He's granted us dignity by believing in Him and following you. how can we give them our money? By Allah, we'll give them nothing but swords until Allah judges between us. So the Prophet himself, despite initiating the idea to, cause division amongst the enemies, he decided himself, after consultation, not to follow through with the plan. But as I said, the Muslims are feeling, even the true Muslims find this test as something that really reinforces their faith, that Allah's promise of victory. And then when Allah sees that the Muslims are becoming more resolute, more steadfast, and have a stronger faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet he then sends the relief and sends the victory, and that comes in the form of one man, Naim ibn Masud. He decides to become a Muslim in that night, the night of Ahzab, or the last couple of nights, and kept it secret. He's a friend of Abu Sufyan. He's a friend of the chief Ka'b ibn Asad and Huyay, and he's met the Prophet before. He goes over, crosses the trench, meets the Prophet and says, "Look, I'm a Muslim. Tell me what I can do." The Prophet says, "You're just one man, but do whatever you can in your capacity over there, for war is deceit." So then he hatches a plan where he goes over to Banu Qurayzah and basically says, "Look, you know me, you trust me, you've got a lot to lose if things don't happen. There's the Quraysh, they might not launch the attack, but you've already betrayed the Prophet ﷺ. So you need to ensure that the Quraysh fight. The only way to ensure that is to ask for 70 of their noble people to come and fight alongside you. Quasi-hostages, right? An insurance policy. So then you know that they're not going to abandon you, and Banu Qurayzah say, "Yeah, sounds like a good idea." So then Naim goes over to the Quraysh to say, "Look, Banu Qurayzah, they're having second thoughts about," we're going to talk to Sufyan, having second thoughts about fighting. They regret the fact that they've broken their pact with the Prophet. You guys aren't attacking. They're going to ask for 70 of yours, noble people, and they're going to execute them and offer that as a peace offering to the Prophet. And Sufyan said, "Well, where did this come from?" And he's a bit suspicious, of this news, but so he just holds it to himself. And then Naim goes to his own tribe, Ghatafaan, and says, "Look, both parties, especially Qurayza, they're having second thoughts. They're going to come and ask you for 70 noblemen to hold them as insurance, hostages, as you may consider. If they do, don't give them 70 of yours because they might kill them. Ask for 70 of theirs first, and then you can do a swap like that." So doubts are being sown amongst the chiefs. So then Abu Sufyan, he wants to check this out. So he sent for Ka'b and basically says, "Look, enough's enough. Let's launch the attack tomorrow." But then Ka'b says, "Look, tomorrow is Sabbath. We can't fight." And then Abu Sufyan, he just sort of freaks out. Calls for Huyay, says, "Well, why can't you fight? It's the Sabbath." And then Huyay says, "Look, we can't do anything on a Saturday." And Abu Sufyan's not heard of this weird custom before. And then basically Qurayza says, "Look, even if we do fight, we still want 70 of your men as hostages." So then Abu Sufyan, he's freaking out, saying, "Look, they've betrayed us, right?" And then he sent words to Ghatafaan, and then he finds out that Ghatafaan are also having second thoughts because they're saying, "Look, we need 70 of yours before we launch an attack." And then that night, Allah sends that tornado or storm, bitter wind, thunderous storm. Everything is flying in the enemy camps. It's freezing cold. They're panic stricken, and they think that this is the time the Prophet will use to attack attack them, and Abu Sufyan basically, says, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going, I can't trust Ghatafaan, I can't trust Banu Qurayzah, everything's gone to pot, I'm off. And then he scarpers again. During that time, just before he makes that announcement, the Prophet ﷺ, he makes dua, he senses a foreboding in the air, asks for a volunteer who's going to find me news. I need first-hand intel of what's happening inside the enemy camp. Are they going to fight? Because we've been seeing the toing and froing between the Quraysh, Ghatafaan, and Banu Qurayzah. They're up to something. They're up to no good. Something's going to happen. I really need first-hand intel from inside the enemy camp. No one's volunteering. It's the bitter wind outside. It's the coldest night ever. And then after a third time of asking, he says, Haudhaifa, you get up and go. And then, makes a dua in Haudhaifa. He goes across, but he said, look, I was just so warm. I felt like I was in a bath, even though it's cold outside. He gets to the enemy camp, sees Abu Sufyan. He's about to shoot him, but then remembers the fact that the Prophet said, look, don't cause any problems. And then sees Abu Sufyan basically saying, look, I've had enough, and I go. And before Abu Sufyan said that, he said, look, just make sure that you know the person next to you. And Haudhaifa's the one who says, who are you? Okay. So then he comes back and he says again, I was walking back as if I was in a heated bath, and he sits at the foot of the Prophet who's standing in prayer with the blanket or duvet of one of his wives around him, and does gestures over to Haudhaifa, says come and come inside the blanket, and then Haudhaifa tells him, and the Prophet is really happy. So that is the Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of Ahzab. And the lessons from Haudhaifa there is basically he was disciplined, he didn't cause trouble, he knew he was on a mission. He didn't feel cold. It's not just adrenaline. It was obviously dua and the miracle from karama from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's able to go to the enemy camp and carry out his mission and come back. His quick thinking when Abu Sufyan says, I've got secret information, just make sure we haven't got anyone who's not supposed to be here. And he grabs the people on both sides, who are you? And again, we talked about how Haudhaifa, he recounts this story many years later when he's in Iraq, and young people are being boastful. Hey, if I was around the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I would have done this, that, the other. We wouldn't have let him down, blah, blah, blah. And then he tells them of this night when nobody volunteered. Okay. So some of the other lessons to talk about, as I say, we're mentioning some of the lessons we go through there. In essence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says, oh, you who believe, in Surah Al-Ahzab in translation, remember the grace of Allah, and when they came down on you hosts to overwhelm you, but we sent against them a hurricane or strong wind and forces that you did not see, but clearly Allah does see all that you do. So no matter how difficult the situation or the predicament that we are in, if we have firm resolve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He will provide us the victory, that is what He will provide us. But we need to remain strong, patient, and work for that victory. We need to dig that trench. We need to stay steadfast. We need to continue to gather intel. We need to continue to be vigilant, right, and prepared to fight. So again, this shows the Iman of the Sahabi, right? That their firm belief in the victory, their firm belief in Allah and the Prophet ﷺ, and the importance of dua and the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, and then when the victory had happened, Prophet ﷺ says, glory be to Allah, He fulfilled His promise that and that we will defend you, and He helped His servant, and He brought honor to His army, and He destroyed the massive Ahzab all by Himself. Allah is sufficient to fight on behalf of the believers. Literally, the Muslims didn't have to lift a sword, apart from Ali, but against 10,000 men, this was a monumental victory, and this was down to their Iman and their belief in Allah and the victory coming from Allah. And again, the lesson is that one man in themselves, Naim ibn Masud al-Ghatafani, his actions were sufficient to really demoralize 10,000 strong army. He knew Abu Sufyan before. His good relations with Banu Qurayzah, and he's from the Ghatafaan, and he managed through his word trickery to sow significant doubts, right? And again, that was just one man, and it shows you even in these severe testing and what may seem like forlorn times, one person can make such a difference. And Naim, he after this, obviously word could get out, but he sincerely made hijrah to Medina, settled in Medina, and he later on it's recorded that he died a shaheed in one of the wars in the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the other thing, how important it is to know the customs of the people, especially your enemies or people that you trust, right? The Quraysh, they had no idea of the rules and regulations, the requirements of Banu Israel, right? The Jews, they had no sense of what they're about, right? They could not understand what is Saturday, except the day between Friday and Sunday, right? And they didn't know the obligations and how important the Sabbath was. And again, for us, it's really important that we really understand what makes other people tick. What are the really important values that they hold on to, right? And that's the only way we can progress and defeat other people should we need to, right? And it was part ignorance that brought down the defeat of Banu Qurayzah. Despite the siege lasting nearly a month, the morale of the Muslims stayed high, and that's really important. The process of living there amongst them, keeping their morale high, and finally, Allah sending His armies of His winds and His angels, armies that could not be seen. And we've talked about there are narrations where people have seen Jibreel on his mule, or when Haudhaifa's coming back from the camp, he bumps into some angels who basically say to him, "Go back to your companion, tell him we've done the job," right? So really important lessons there. And a couple of other things just to highlight, how the Jewish elders became allied to the mushrikeen, and then claimed that these people are closer to Islam, that the mushrik are closer to Islam than the Muslims, right? And you can see how contradictory philosophies, the monotheism of Banu Israel and the polytheism of the mushrikeen, how these contradictory philosophies come together when they try to oppose Allah and His Rasul. And that is exactly what's happening today, when you've got the contradictory philosophies of the liberal democratic West being allied, strong allies, to the dictators, people who don't want to give any voice to the people, strong, bitter, ferocious dictators, and these dictators are all over the Muslim world now. Yet they are in strong alliance with the West that champions its values, thinks its values are really important and should be exported, but does nothing against these dictators. And, so they come together to fight the Muslims. And it's important for us Muslims to make use of technology, right? We talked about this in warfare. Technology, we can take technology, so long as it doesn't contradict our belief in our creed, right? We've talked before how the Prophet demonstrated, strong and committed leadership. He's digging there, with the people. He's digging the trenches. He's not doing it for publicity. He's not, handing out, free meals and getting the cameras in and uploading things on Facebook and WhatsApp just to big himself up. No, this is a reality. He is part of the struggle, and he wants the people to see that. So it raises the morale of the Muslims. They raised the morale of the Muslims when they were digging through nasheed and remembrance, right? And the need to be positive, right? The promises of victory. It's to keep the morale high, keep the Muslims positive, right? And how the Prophet he reacted to the betrayal of Banu Qurayzah. He said, look, glad tidings. He was optimistic and he had true trust in Allah for the victory. And we just talked about the differential response to hardship. The Quraysh, not the Quraysh, the Munafiqeen and the hypocrites, they use these hard times to sow negative propaganda. You guys are dreaming. You're never going to be able to do this, right? This is really, a false hope. But that situation in itself allows the Muslims to become stronger in this adversity. So I'll just hang on a second whilst the Iman finishes. So final few points, and then I need to obviously go and pray. It's really important for us to understand the geopolitical environment. The Prophet was a keen observer of the political situation around him. He remained alert. He always sent out, people to gather intel. He always kept up to date with the news to know what was going on, to know about his enemy, what his enemy's thinking, what his enemy's up to. There'd be exploratory missions, news gathering missions, intel. It's really important for us as Muslims to keep up to date with what's going on and not to keep our pretend that the world outside is not important. We really need to keep up to date and keep up to date with the thinking of what's going on and how to counter it and see where the threats and hostility can come from. So intelligence gathering is vital, and it's important to know how other people think, and it's only through that early warning system that the Prophet was able to respond quickly and effectively, because had they just been surprised by the 10,000 people just turning up on their doorstep, they would not have been able to dig the trench, they would not have been able to defend themselves, and they would have been potentially wiped out. This was an existential threat. And again, we just talked about the use of new technology. The trench is new technology being used for the first time, and the Prophet is getting the Muslims to use it, in the hope, because it's not linked to a specific ideology, it is just technology, right? So we need to be up to date with the latest tech, the latest advances in science, warfare, communications, in order to compete effectively, and that's what the Prophet was doing. And then once he had done that, he's encouraging the Muslims of victory. Then the wind and the fierce rain, fierce cold came to their defense. Prophet also, as we just mentioned, tried to adopt political and economic means to divide the enemy, to weaken the enemy by preparing to offer a third of the dates of Medina. It was specifically to break the unity of the Qurayshi alliance, right? So he's, as I say, using these political and economic means to divide the enemy. That's really important. We need to posture ourselves in order that we can facilitate things like this when people are coming up against us. And obviously trusting that the nusra of Allah, the help of Allah, will come, especially to those who are steadfast and patient. And it was only because of that that Allah rewarded the Muslims. So victory comes from Allah regardless of the numbers and material strength of our enemies, right? Reliance on Allah is key, but it needs to be preceded by the necessary, human effort, digging the trench, right? We need to prepare to the best of our abilities, and then Allah will give us the victory, right? It's important to seek wise counsel for leaders. Muslim, like Prophet, he accepted the counsel of Salman al-Farsi, right? And he sought shura from both the Saads, okay, when it was required. So the leadership needs, that is an important part of leadership. Consulting with the necessary people, leading from the front, being there, digging the trench, being on the front line, not sitting back, in your palaces, driving your fancy cars. It's actually getting your hands dirty all the time and striving as hard as you can. Again, so consultation is important, but seeking the pleasure of Allah is the topmost motivating factor for any Muslim. Okay, not for the cameras, not for fame, not for anything else. It should only be for seeking the pleasure of Allah, and that should be enough to motivate us. So, in essence, I'll finish there. The myriad of lessons, inshallah, from the Battle of Ahzab, the Battle of Khandaq, were the one and the same. Inshallah, next time we'll talk about Banu Qurayzah. And Banu Qurayzah, it'll be probably split into two. One is the actual fighting of Banu Qurayzah, what happened, and one is the lessons of Banu Qurayzah. And the really important lesson is around ikhtilaf, which we might spend a whole session on as well. So anyway, I'll finish there. Do remember us in your du'as, do remember the Ummah in your du'as, in your comments, queries, or other considerations. Email me, WhatsApp me with YouTube or whatever. Do share, subscribe, and promote as necessary. And inshallah, catch up with you next time, inshallah. So do take care. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa la inna al-insana la fi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.